The research is showing us that excluding kids from conversations about illness and death can lead to negative long term outcomes like increased anxiety or decreased trust, resentment, and anger. So, a big part of what we're doing is guiding families on how to have those conversations to include the kids in an age appropriate way that leads to better long term outcomes.
Welcome to the Inheritance of Hope podcast. Every day, 562 children lose a parent to terminal illness. They shouldn't have to face that alone. You can pretend to avoid the painful realities of illness, grief, and death, or you can deal with the real stuff in caring community. On the podcast, people in Inheritance of Hope's community share raw, personal stories of pain, trials, and the shadow of death, which are also stories of joy in terminal illness. Find more Inheritance of Hope community at inheritanceofhope.org. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Inheritance of Hope podcast. We are joined with another child life specialist to share her wisdom, talking through the topic of preparing children emotionally before a parent dies. A lot of our audience at Inheritance of Hope is facing the grief of anticipating the loss of a parent due to terminal illness. And so we want to enter into that sweet space and say, this is hard. How can we equip you to have these conversations within your family and feel supported and loved in the process? So I will let our guest introduce herself and share her wisdom in this topic.
It's so good to connect again. I'm so happy to be here and excited to talk through a little bit more with you. My name is Erin. I'm the Children and Families Program Lead over at the Gathering Place, which is a caring cancer community support program in Cleveland, Ohio. We support, educate, and empower families faced with challenges associated with cancer through programming and support that's provided free of charge. I'm coming from 10 years of a hospital position at a major healthcare organization in the Cleveland area.
We will put links in the show notes for people. If you are in the Cleveland, Ohio area and your ears just perked up, we'll link everything so that you can access that local resource. But for someone who's listening and doesn't know or hasn't heard of the term child life specialist before, can you explain what that role is and how you support children and families, both, in your role in the hospital and now in your role outside of the healthcare experience?
I'm very passionate about this work and this role. And child life is in and of itself a newer profession, definitely growing in popularity throughout hospital systems. And an exciting new chapter that we're in is branching out into support organizations like the Gathering Place. So child life specialists are healthcare professionals, and we focus on helping children and families cope with stress and uncertainty of illness, hospitalization, and death. So our big background is child development, and we use play, age-appropriate education, and preparation, and then we do family and individual support to decrease trauma and guide families through medical experiences, illness journeys, and even grief and bereavement.
I love connecting with other child life specialists. I have that background as well. I just did not make it to 10 years in the healthcare experience. It is fun to transfer that into more of the nonprofit sector and apply those skills. So what does it look like for you to practice in that role at the Gathering Place?
That looks like focusing on psychosocial and emotional well-being of our participants and their children. So that looks like medical play in understanding and increasing their knowledge of cancer treatments. That looks like individual support through one-on-one support sessions. And that looks like our grief support that is group and peer-based. So a big focus at the Gathering Place is our peer connection. And evidence and research is showing us that when children can connect with peers who are going through a very similar experience, that their long-term coping and adjustment improves.
Yeah, that it's such a core pillar to a lot of organizations, I think, because it is such a need. I know we have programs at Inheritance of Hope where the big thing is just connecting with people who get it. And that in and of itself is such a healing
space, and it's so helpful to connect with other people who have a shared language. You don't have to explain from scratch what your situation is because they're living a very similar reality.
The power of shared experiences.
And both in your role in the hospital and now in the nonprofit world, what have you heard as some of the most common fears and misconceptions or questions from parents who are worried about how their children will cope emotionally?
So a common fear that parents share is that they're unsure how much or what kind of information to provide to kids. Of course, it's coming from a place of love. No parent wants to feel like they're doing a disservice to their kids. They want to make sure that they're protecting their kids from harsh realities, which oftentimes with illness, with grief and bereavement is not an option. We can't avoid the truth. So if parents come to me and say, I don't know what to say or how to say it. Want to protect their kids. But the research is showing us that excluding kids from conversations about illness and death can lead to negative long-term outcomes like increased anxiety or decreased trust, resentment, and anger. So a big part of what we're doing is guiding families on how to have those conversations to include the kids in an age-appropriate way that leads to better long-term outcomes.
That is the foundation of this conversation. We trust that the parents listening to this are doing a good job and love their families. And so if you hear any of what we're about to say and you realize, oh, I'm not doing this, that's okay. This is an invitation to consider how this could look like for your family because you know your family best. So I love that you said this is all coming from a place of love, wanting to protect your kids. This is just offering maybe a suggestion on what it could look like and giving that language. So thank you for setting that stage. From your background in child development, could you share how a child's understanding of death specifically changes depending on the developmental stage that they're in?
Death is a hard concept. A lot of it is like a hypothetical or more advanced thinking concept when we think about death. Kids' understanding of that is going to be different based on their developmental level. To fully understand the concept of death, we're looking at a couple things for our kiddos. So we're going to look at the universality, that kids understand that all living things will eventually die. We're going to look at irreversibility and finality, and that means that death is permanent and that the body stops working completely. So that looks like a kid understanding that their loved one is not going to come back, that they are dead. And finally, causality, so that there's a biological reason a person died. Their heart stopped working, their lungs aren't breathing, meaning that our kids understand you can't wish someone dead. So those are kind of our big pillars of making sure that kids understand the concept of death. And that changes as they grow and advance to those next developmental levels and stages. So as kids internalize that, they recognize those concept of death, that could potentially bring grief up to the surface again. So I don't want to say it will bring grief back because grief is never gone. It just could potentially bring it back to the surface as they grow and understand those pillars a little bit more. So when we're looking at research and we're kind of talking about shared experiences, most kiddos kind of understand those concepts right around the ages of 8 to 10 is when we can kind of expect kids to understand universality, irreversibility and finality, and causality as the core components of the concept of death.
Yeah, because kids are so imaginative, also very egotistical, not necessarily in the negative connotation that we hear it in, but thinking like the world revolves around them. If I had a bad thought about my sister or I hit my brother, it might cause them to be sick. Or there's things that in the adult brain, A plus B does not equal C in the same way that it might for a child's brain. I love how you put that understanding. These are some of the pillars, and it might not make sense to us, or we might not need explanations of it, but also needing to maybe revisit them as the children continue to grow and then are in a new developmental stage, and it might look different. You might feel like a redundant conversation over the years.
Kids don't have to understand them in any particular order. They could get one concept before the other. It doesn't necessarily go 1, 2, 3, okay, we've got it. Sometimes it could look like I've got this concept, and then a couple of years later I'll get this concept. So it doesn't happen in a timeline or in a time way of 1, 2, 3.
When you're talking about, parents coming from a place of love and wanting to protect their children, not knowing how much information to share, I feel like it's very common for parents to worry that they might say the wrong thing, that they might okay, I need to share more information, but how do I say it? What do I say? From your experience, what tends to help children feel the safest emotionally during this season? And how might that help equip parents to know what to say?
There is no such thing as perfect right now. There are no perfect words to tell your child that their parent is going to die. There is no perfect time to tell your child that their parent is going to die. But kids don't need perfection. They need presence. And that looks like your physical presence, your emotional presence to them. So I kind of already have parents take off that perfect, take that off your plate, take that off your expectations because it's not possible. But kids don't need perfection. They need presence. So when we talk about helping kids feel emotionally safe, that's like inclusion in conversations. That looks like information provided in a developmentally appropriate manner that involves validation of emotions and thoughts and feelings. And that means maintaining routine and structure as much as you can. When parents provide those things, those are really our pillars of emotional safety. And that's what all parents want is their kids to feel safe. And emotional safety is what we're reaching towards. So when parents offer that support, they teach and model healthy ways to cope, and they create a space where children feel safe. That can lead to a decrease in that emotional uncertainty.
And what about, balancing trying to include the child and making them feel emotionally prepared? Like, what are some steps that a parent can take to balance that
Sure.
well?
Yeah. Yeah. You want to provide information as best as possible. And of course, as parents, you want to do it the best that you can and make sure that we're doing it in a way that is protective of our kiddos while including them. So that looks as simple as following the child's lead. You're going to want to share any immediate and important information that the kids need to have. You want to share any changes that the kids might see or experience, and then encourage emotional questions and expressions of feeling. So using that framework of sharing immediate information, talking about those changes and validating emotions, you want to try to share just as much information as the kid is looking for in this initial conversation. When we talk about conversations with kiddos, we're not talking about a single conversation. We're talking about ongoing conversations that usually happen in little snippets over time. So in this initial conversation, you don't have to share everything all at once. You're going to want to follow the child's lead with how they're receiving that information. So don't feel like you have to fill in all the gaps all the time. Some parents are like, what does that mean, follow the child's lead? And it's really as how engaged are they in the conversation? If a child is asking you a question, it's a good indicator that they're ready and willing to receive that information. So if you have provided the immediate information they need to know, but then they don't ask any follow-up questions, don't feel like you have to fill that space right away. This is going to be ongoing conversations throughout time. So just follow the kids' leads and allow space for a break if they need it.
You know your child well,
Yes.
and you know them the best. You know they're feeling kind of flooded and need a break, or if they're really leaning in, asking good questions. That is a great way to do it. And I know working in the hospital with kids as a child life specialist, one tool that we would use often is medical play. And it's not just, the play lady, the lady bringing the toys in and passing time. It was the therapeutic intervention to build an assessment, because what we would look for in that is what fears or misconceptions are coming up as this child is acting things out in play. So you're playing doctor and the child is starting to say like, oh, I'm going to hurt you as they're playing the doctor. That's a clue. Like if you just lean in and listen for those things, they have this misconception that the doctor is playing this role. I can step in as the parent and say like, oh, doctors are helping figure out what's wrong with our bodies and how to help us feel healthy and strong. Listen for what questions they're asking or not asking, but also tune your ear into what's coming up in their play.
You make such a great point because play is the work of children. It's how they make sense of the world. It's how they learn to cope and understand what's going on around them. So if we're a little bit more attuned to the behaviors that they're doing through play, that can be a great opportunity to, in a non-threatening way, invite those conversations, encourage those conversations through play.
A little bit ago, you mentioned having routines, and that is helpful for kind of creating that emotional safety. So what kinds of conversations or routines are helpful for children during these uncertain times?
Yeah, routines and boundaries, when they can be maintained, are good for children. It creates a sense of predictability, it creates a sense of safety. So I kind of have families remember almost three concepts when they're grasping for something to maintain or to hold on to. I'm going to want them to remember these things. I want you to maintain contact, maintain routines, and maintain support. So, what does that look like? Maintaining contact is maintaining contact between the child and the dying parent. We want them to have as much contact safely as they can, as many memories made, as many conversations had. Maintaining contact looks like connection between the child's school or religious institution, just keeping them updated on things that are going on at home, and maintaining contact between the parent, the well parent, and the child. Make sure that our emotional check ins are happening, make sure communication is open and honest and ongoing. And then, like you said, maintain routines. Predictability and structure help children feel safe and it helps them to feel cared for. So, if we can keep routines the same, if we can keep boundaries the same, we're going to encourage that to happen within families. And maintain support. That looks like support for the well parent and support for the child. And engage with professional support systems. That's why the gathering place exists. That's why Inheritance of Hope exists. So we can provide these shared experiences to families know that they are not walking this journey alone and they don't have to.
And maybe someone listening to that who is either the diagnosed parent themselves or the caregiver is like, I am doing the best I can. I am swamped. I feel emotionally exhausted. Like, how do I show up and do the things that you just said? Yeah, what could that look like?
Yeah, that looks like open and honest communication between the kids. And kids a lot of times, like you said, are egocentric. I'm not in a bad way, in a developmentally appropriate way. So they're worried that they did or caused something to make this happen. So just being open and honest and say, you know what, I am feeling really tired right now. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. I just need a little rest. I love you very much. That could look like, a well parent saying, I am really angry today. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do, but I need a break outside. And I think sometimes parents are hesitant to do that in front of their kids because they want to come across as invincible, as strong, as I can solve any problem. And of course they do, because we want to protect our kids. But what we're doing when we're engaging in these conversations is reinforcing that it's not the child's fault. They didn't do or say anything. And two, you're arming your kids with tools and language that they can use in the future. If they're feeling a similar way, they can think back and be like, oh yeah, Dad used the word angry. That's how I'm feeling right now. So we're arming them with tools that they can use in the future to help with coping and with adjustment.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful picture as you were talking about that of how a parent can model emotional regulation as it's happening. And I don't think a lot of us do it well because I don't think we've had it modeled well for us. And, it is hard to be in that moment and say, I'm going to name what I'm feeling. I'm going to make sure I'm not placing blame on you. And I'm going to say that to you. And then I'm going to find an activity that I can help regulate myself. That's a big task, but it does set your family up for success. They know I don't have to push through. I don't have to pretend everything's okay. I'm really mad that my dad is dying, or it makes me really sad that my mom has to do chemo and that I know she's going to die soon. That's normal. Like, wouldn't you want your child to come to you and say that? And I think building it, you have to build that by starting it yourself a lot of times.
Right. And as parents, we have to give yourself just a little bit of grace as you're navigating this unknown. It's okay to go back and you say, you know what, mommy or daddy, I didn't handle that right, and I'm sorry. It's okay to say, I'm sorry, because again, you are providing that opportunity for kids to learn that from you in the future. So just acknowledging feelings and naming them, validating that all feelings and emotions are okay. We just have to express them in a healthy way.
What advice would you give to a surviving parent or caregiver who wants to continue supporting the child's grief after the death of a parent?
I would definitely tell them to have kind of those ongoing conversations. So a big theme throughout our talk today is that these are not one and done things. These are ongoing conversations that you're going to have as children age and go through those next developmental stages. Continue with conversations, continue with emotional check-ins, and definitely follow the child's lead. I think it's important too for listeners to remember that kids grieve and express grief differently than adults. So with our childlike background, we use the analogy of puddle jumpers. Kids are puddle jumpers when processing big information like death or the impending death of a parent. So that means kids have moments of very intense grief reactions where they're in that grief puddle, but then they quickly jump out of that puddle and they re-engage in different activities where they ask about soccer practice or what's for dinner. So just a gentle reminder to parents that this is normal. This is a healthy expression of coping and understanding. So when you want to support your kid and they're in that grief puddle, just a gentle reminder, it's not your job to fix it. It's not your job to take away that grief puddle. It's your job to join them in it, however that looks. You know your child best. So, how does it look to support them? Does it look like just sitting there quietly next to them, providing that presence? Does it look like asking them, hey, do you want to look at photos of mom or dad? Do you want to talk about our last vacation? I can see that you're in that puddle right now. Let's go outside and kick the soccer ball around for a little bit. So, just reassuring a child that I'm right here with you. I miss them too, or saying, I wish things were different too, that can really go a long way in validating and supporting our kids.
We often say in child life, like kids are resilient. And sometimes that's not enough to just hear that. It's like, okay, that's good to hear, but what does that actually look like? So, what have you seen children do remarkably well, even in the midst of a heartbreaking circumstance?
Yeah, as my background in child life and within the hospital setting, I have been witness to some very traumatic and stressful experiences for children and for families. And I have seen with encouraged inclusion, but not forced, I have really witnessed kids cope with extremely stressful and challenging life events. So, inclusion looks like providing developmentally appropriate information, following that child's lead, validating of all thoughts and feelings and emotions, and modeling those expressions of healthy coping strategies. And we really can lead to more positive adjustment outcomes with our kiddos.
If you could say one reassuring thing to parents who are afraid that their children will never recover emotionally from this loss, or just after hearing this conversation, because this is a heavy topic, this is a heavy concept if this is where your family is at in the moment, it's hard. What encouragement or final word would you want them to hear?
I would just remind them that early intervention and support are important when we're talking about long term adjustment and coping. And then I would remind parents that you're already doing that. You're already doing that by engaging with organizations like Inheritance of Hope, like The Gathering Place, just by listening to this podcast. You are already doing those action steps just by seeking out this information, seeking out this advice and resources, and taking those action steps. You are potentially leading to better outcomes already. So you're already doing what you can.
I love that we started this conversation with that affirmation of you know your child best, you want the best for them, and ending with that as well is like you are doing a good job. Keep it up. Even just by listening to this podcast and finding these resources, like you are doing incredible. Thank you, Erin, for all of these tips and the language that you used. I think is just a great launching pad for families to take and then apply in their own family systems in a way that they think will be applied best. So thank you for your time and wisdom.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ellie.